Welcome back, y'all, to the Rec Room hosted by Brian Rector. And today is episode 19, which is pretty crazy because that puts us, I was just telling my guest for this show that puts us at 52 of all time across the different shows we've been able to do. And I'm very excited to have this guest, the lady, I never get this right, but I think it's that way. I think that's how it's going to show up on the Zoom. So we'll see if we get that we get that right. But this is amazing because I feel like this episode today really highlights the premise of divine connections and just being able to get together and speak on the goodness of God, even though we are hundreds of thousands of millions of miles away. And by the way, we had never met in person, which is remarkable for a reason that we got to share. So, I myself, many of you have known, have become somebody who works within Michigan State volleyball. Now, that's convenient because this lady over here had been a player at Michigan State volleyball, but graduated in December of 2021. No. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
21. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you. I got that right. I was making sure. Right when I had gotten to Michigan State in August of 2021. And back then, which we also learned, is that I was connected to a couple people that she may know or was playing with in practice at that time. Shout out Clark, shout out Paul.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't really get connected. And like my experience with Michigan State volleyball has started the last couple of years. At this point, I learned more about who she is, which is why I am pleased to introduce Talia Edmonds Robinson, who is self-proclaimed follower of Christ, wife, which we will hit on. I really am excited to get into that one too and talk about Mr. Robinson, former volleyball player at Michigan State, did her time, graduated, and then moved to the University of Hawaii at Manoa, which tied together family roots and was just an experience that I too am excited to get into. I mean, look at that backdrop. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to Hawaii, everybody. You're
that,
basically here with me.
that's like a green screen right there. We were talking about it. Like that thing is unfair. I mean, I could point my background out and it's a paved path in a parking lot and about 8 inches of snow. I mean, come on.
To
Uh,
be fair, I miss East Lansing. I really do. Such a like a beautiful, special place. So, for whatever that's worth, you're right where you need to be, Brian.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And last, but arguably the most important, baby adult who's just beginning to figure out things post school, not quite, but soon, post
Mhm.
athletics, and then moving into numerous next chapters. So, Talia, welcome to the podcast. The Rec Room is excited to roll on with you.
Thank you so much, Brian, for just asking me to be on and for taking the time to plan all this out. So I am really appreciative and I'm excited to be here. So thank you.
Most certainly, most certainly, most certainly. And when you and I were speaking off camera, one of the things that struck me immediately was that, and we'll get into it later, but the bridge between faith, between mental
Mhm.
health advocacy, and between athletics. Now, the latter two are coming together in mental health advocacy and sport for you. As you're headed to Colorado, I heard Boulder is calling. Shout out Dion, if he can hear me out there. The Rocky Mountains. Talk to me a little bit about where you're headed with that and kind of how those couple fields are coming together.
Yeah, so I have had an amazing opportunity so I'm finishing up in the Master's Social Work program here at UH. And I've had the amazing opportunity to do my practicum, my specialist year practicum, with a program called Rainbow Wellness. And Rainbow Wellness is situated within athletics here at UH. And basically, we do everything from individual counseling and therapy to team consulting to just presentations, all these different things that span just getting mental health, making it more prevalent within the realm of athletics. And so,
Mm,
me and one other intern, which is actually my really good friend, we're we got the opportunity to go to this conference, and it's the first annual kind of mental health and athletics conference that's being hosted for student athletes, coaches, other mental health practitioners within the fields, and then um, other people as well. And so this is the first opportunity that I'm ever getting to go to a conference like this, to network, to just learn as much as I can about what this intersection looks like practically. And so I am beyond excited. I think we leave. It's kind of a gnarly travel trip. You know, it's Hawaii's awesome, but we are 5 hours, a 5 hour flight from any civilization, basically. So I will be flying out, I think on Monday night around 10:30, and then we have to stop in Seattle. So that's about a 5 hour flight. And then we go from Seattle to Colorado. And so and then we're there for maybe, I think the conference itself is Tuesday, or no, it was Wednesday, Thursday, and then we fly back on Friday. So it's a very quick trip, but I am very excited just to go and be able to expand my network, but then also be able to learn more about what it looks like to be a mental health practitioner in the field of athletics.
Mm, hmm And the way you describe it, like taking that long sojourn to get somewhere, right? And to be in a space where you're learning and growing. To me, when I hear that, I think about nothing else but taking leaps of faith to establish this next move that you're making, this next career, so to say, that you're embarking on. But I'm struck by this because I recently heard you on a podcast that I think took place last year, if I'm not mistaken, but you had mentioned that it was back then your first semester out of the sports realm, and we're working on some things and kind of figuring it out a little bit. But I wanted to ask is like, now we're here and things are, moves are being made, changes are happening. Like, how are you doing with the continued transition and working through the thoughts and feelings of continuing to phase away from that chapter in the sports realm?
That is such a wonderful question. And I think it's so funny that, yes, you're right, last year that I was doing that podcast. And I was so honest just about like, hey guys, I don't know what I'm doing. I had to finish up some classes, but even at that time, I thought I was going to be done at the end of last summer.
Mm.
Like I thought I was going to be graduated. So I had my whole family and friends basically come out for my graduation that I walked in, and then turns out I wasn't actually graduating. So there's just been a lot of things in this season of my life. You know, I think with athletics and with a college volleyball career or just a college athletics career. So I played for 6 years. I played about 3.5 at Michigan State, and then I finished out at the University of Hawaii. But for that span of 6 years, you're essentially everything is planned out for you. You have your season, you have winter break, you have spring practice, and then you have summer, and you kind of are in this routine of you know how your life is going to go, you know what's coming next. And then all of a sudden, at the end of my indoor career, I find myself not really knowing what to do. I wanted to play beach volleyball, and that's a little bit of a side tangent itself. Is I was actually on the beach volleyball team for a few weeks, and then come to find out there was a mistake made in compliance, and so I actually didn't have any eligibility left when I thought I did. So even at that moment, I was like, "Wow, how I thought all of this was going to go didn't work out that way." And so that is a season where I look back and I'm like, wow, my faith was definitely tested, but I'm so glad that I had a faith to be able to fall back on, a God that I could rely on, a God that I could trust, that was ordering my steps in the process. And let me tell you guys, he has definitely ordered my steps, because that is the only way I'm able to say that now I have a better idea of kind of the direction I'm going. But at the
Mm.
same time, it is all based on trust and faith. And so I still don't have it all figured out. And I probably never will, but that's okay, because we have a God that loves us and he has it all figured out. He's already written our story. So I think that is something that I found a lot of reassurance in. And the reason that I can proclaim that I am such a strong follower of Christ is because I've seen him show up in these seasons where I'm like, I have no idea what's next.
Mm. So I want to take a moment here, take a little bit of a pause, because I think you did something really cool as I was listening to you. You kind of answered the next question I had a little bit, in a way, but I want to take it another way, because what I was going to ask, I'll just be upfront, was about advice on regret versus contentment to be where you're at. Now, this is
Mm-hmm.
interesting because as I heard you speak, I heard that eligibility that you thought you had was no longer there, and this end to the career was starting to be deconstructed. And as you said, maybe not go according to your plan. Now, from my understanding and stories I've heard before, that can breed resent and frustration and grief and mourning and all of these things that are conventionally known as not very good things to deal with. They're difficult. But in the answer you gave, I thought it was beautiful the way you laid it out and how your faith has been a guide. So I want to ask two things out of that. Is like, I'll get back to it. What is your advice for those who are in the sports space that are swayed by these conditions that are external, that are hard to have control over or exercise, any semblance of control, versus with in your situation, how is it that you've been able to reach the level of being content with how it finished, and what are some of the things that have helped you along the way of that?
Yeah, so I think my first inclination to answer that question is this. There's a scripture that, and it's I think in Proverbs, and it basically is just like in our hearts, like humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps.
Mm,
And I that is something that I recently have kind of used as a verse to stand on. But in those seasons, so basically, if you go back to my very last season, which was 2023, and I think I chatted with you about this a little bit before we got on, but just that my volleyball career didn't end in the way that I would have liked it to,
sure.
right? Just with playing time and all these different things like outside factors, external factors that I had no control over. But I had been a follower of Christ probably for like going on like 8, 9 months at that point, and I was still navigating this whole being a Christian thing. But I feel like the Lord in that season was kind of stripping me of some of these things that he knew were not gonna carry me forward once they were done. For instance, I think a lot of athletes, you'll hear this, they put their identity in their sport, and then their sport gets taken away because of injury or because of some unforeseen circumstance, and then they're in this space of just being lost. And
Mhm.
I can relate to that. We can talk about that, me for Christ, but I think just it's that's a very common situation where you find yourself with all of these external factors, whether you're not playing, whether you're like school isn't going the way that you want it to. Like there are a lot of moving pieces a lot of the times. And so I found that my faith was like a security blanket when like
Mm.
I said, didn't know what was going to be next. And so I think it's a lot easier said than done. And I'm not saying I did it perfectly. I cried. I had questions. I was frustrated. But with all of those feelings, exactly like you were talking about, is I had the Lord to take them to. Like I had an outlet for all of these things that I was navigating. And then all of a sudden, as I was feeling all of these things, I was able to look back and see like, wow, I actually am coming out of this way better than I would have, I think, if I didn't have my faith to rely on. And so to answer your question is it's really, really challenging thing to do. It's not like I can just say, yeah, you can just give it to the Lord and you're going to be able to process the end of your career really well and you're not going to make mistakes. That is not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that as you were kind of taking, and I love the baby adult analogy because it's so funny. Like imagining us as soon as you're done with your sport, whenever that is, whether you go play professionally, whether you stop, whether you have to medically retire, you have to stop early, your career one day is going to end. And it's okay to be stumbling out of that like a baby on fresh legs, because that is what we are essentially. We've had athletics to guide us, we've had that space to help us grow in. But at the end of the day, it's okay to take steps and stumble, but just know and trust that the Lord really will order those steps in a direction that is fruitful, that is good. And so that's a kind of an answer to that question in a way it can be encouraging, but then at the same time, it's like it's gonna kind of suck for a little bit. That's just honestly what it is because it's a huge life transition.
Mm. That's right. And one of the previous transitions that I know that you had undergone, and one that definitely you hear about it today with all of the openings to things like the transfer portal and ways of
Mm.
being flexible, is that after you had finished at Michigan State, there was the question of where to go. And I really want to hear the wholeness of your philosophy on this one, so I'll leave it very short. Was moving to the University of Hawaii and kind of bringing together some family ties and these external factors, was that worth it for you?
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely was. It was worth the 2 weeks that I didn't know where I was gonna go, that I
Mm,
didn't even know if Hawaii had a spot for me. Like right after I entered the portal, at the end of that season, it was worth kind of like in a way I felt like I was gonna have to disappoint my teammates and let them know that I was leaving. And my greatest friends are from Michigan State, and I was gonna have to leave East Lansing. And so that was a very turbulent time, and it happened very all happened very quickly.
mm,
But I can now look back and say that I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be, and God had ordained that the whole kind of path for me. Basically, I as soon as I entered the portal and I was interested in Hawaii, I reached out to the coaches, and at first I didn't hear back for a little bit, but then I had a friend who they had just had a girl move out of their house, and so there was a room for me, and so there was just all of these pieces that were falling into place, and now I'm realizing it was definitely God, and it was definitely worth it. I had family out here that had never seen me play volleyball in person. They'd only been able to watch me on TV, luckily, because of being at Michigan State, but they had never seen me play in person, and so I got to come here, play in the Stan Sheriff, which was I hands down one of the best places in the country to play volleyball.
mm.
And so it was just a blessing in disguise for sure, because even all the things that I could have expected, like being able to play volleyball out here, have my family watch me, the Lord has exceeded those expectations. Absolutely.
Mm. I jokingly I had texted you last night and said I'm kind of playing stalker right now, trying to figure
Yeah.
out some information. One of the pieces that I stumbled across was how you had mentioned that, and this was the same podcast I was referring to earlier last year, but how you had mentioned that you kind of realized later on how talented your mom was at the sport of volleyball.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I bring that up because I gotta know, like, what are your thoughts, with your mother's situation? We're talking about the AIAW, like a different,
Mm-hmm.
governing organization. We're talking about a different era of women's volleyball. And we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at it now and thinking the growth that has been seen is so hard to even get a grasp of or to comprehend what's being done in that realm. So I want you to tell me, Talia, like, what are your thoughts about where the sport's going and about the enhancement of women's sports as a whole?
Yeah, that is so awesome. Like such an awesome question, because I think when you're in Hawaii, especially like being out here, people love the sport of volleyball.
Mm,
It's not new. Beach volleyball quite literally started on a beach right back there. Like this is a volleyball oriented state. It's almost
sure.
like volleyball is like the basketball and the football of the mainland. And I think that was another reason I wanted to come here, is because I knew how much the sport was cherished, and also the history of the University of Hawaii's volleyball program as well, in terms of one of the first national champions ever. And
Mhm.
I think that I stumbled across this video a couple months ago. I think it was actually probably right after NCAA, or right before NCAAs for volleyball were going to start. But it was basically every single match point from the beginning of the NCAA to the most recent one. And I watched the whole video. It's probably like 6, 7 minutes long, but it was so interesting to see just the evolution of the sport. And to go back to the question about my mom, I've learned she was a part of a 19 in the 1980s. She was a part of a UH Hilo team, so that's the University of Hawaii Hilo, who's D2 now. But at the time, it was like, yeah, they were AIAW, and then they also were NAI. I think maybe for a year
Mm,
or so. Like
mhm.
it was very recent, the NAI at that time. But she was part of a team that won 5 national championships. Like that is unheard of. And my mom she was she's 5'7", but she was a setter and a middle. Like if that gives you any idea of like how the sport of volleyball is now evolving, I think it's an awesome and beautiful thing, because also now you're seeing the more recognition for the athleticism that's involved in the sport, for the excitement that's involved in the sport. And I think, we as volleyball players are like, we've been known that this is an awesome sport to be part of, but
That's
it's
right.
now cool to see that recognition continue to grow, but then also the sport of volleyball continue to evolve in ways where now you can have 6'8", 6'9" girls playing volleyball, but you can also have 5'2" girls playing volleyball as well. So you have this range of a diversity of what athleticism looks like. And I think that that's been my favorite part is just being able to see how people are getting creative in how they're running their offenses or how they're getting creative in recruiting and
Mm.
putting the pieces together. I think that that is has been something that as a collegiate volleyball player that's now on the outside looking in, I'm like, wow, this is going somewhere, and it's drastically it's on an incline very quickly.
Mm. I make this joke in the space of volleyball commentators and people who are around the game that I, being from Oregon, in a sport or in a state rather that isn't necessarily synonymous with the game of volleyball, I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
what the sport was until I was 17.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, what are we doing here? But
Yeah.
but I say that because it kind of felt like August of 23 felt like a little bit of a baptismal introduction, if I may be so frank, to the sport of volleyball for fans
Mm,
around the country, with Nebraska playing outdoors in front of
yes.
93,000 people.
Yes.
What Before we move out here, and I think you'll see the transition that I'm going to make, as rocky as it might be, was the fact that the sport jumped in notoriety and in viewership and eyes when that happened. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think, as somebody who's been in it for so long, it will take to keep this move going?
Yeah, I also think it's so cool. It is one of the coolest things ever that Nebraska volleyball sold out a football stadium for volleyball. The funny part about that is though, I don't know if I envy them having to play on a court that was set up in the middle of a football field like during the daytime. I feel like that was probably actually really challenging, especially for indoor players who there's like the what you're dealing with the elements. It's a funny concept, but also awesome that you're right. I think that is a great way to describe it. Is that was very kind of first thing that it was putting college volleyball on the map. Like college volleyball had already been on the up and coming in terms of just like, the viewership growing. But you're right, that was a really big moment. And so now you just see stadiums getting sold out, like just they're having to expand the space that they're having these games in, which I think is awesome. But I think it's just going to continue to on its own have this exponential increase only because it's so fresh. Like people are like literally opening their eyes to this sport of volleyball when like places like Hawaii are like, hey, we've been known about this, hidden gem in sport. But I think too, what it really will do though is expand opportunity for young kids from more diverse backgrounds. So I grew up in a place where predominantly black, not like low income, where basically basketball and football is what you do. You grow up, you play basketball, you play football. Like volleyball is like, you can play it, but there's not club is too expensive, and there's just not as many opportunities in the city that I'm from, and from Kalamazoo. Not a lot of opportunity to play volleyball, but now like in I think kind of the fruits of what you're seeing on the big stage is you're going to start to see in these communities now. I think volleyball is going to be more accessible to
Mm.
young kids who maybe have seen it on TV or they've seen these stadiums getting sold out, but they never really had the opportunity to go and play. I think now, hopefully, what you're going to see is a growing of the sport throughout just the country and then throughout the world as well, because now you're seeing professional leagues start to grow, and there's many professional leagues now in the US, which that wasn't even a thing until a couple years ago. And so I think young girls especially, but also boys, like men's volleyball is also very much on the up and coming. I think you're going to see them be able to aspire to want to go do this professionally and be able to stay in the United States. And I think that's a beautiful, amazing thing.
Mm, absolutely. And I really love the way you said it. In fact, one of the ways I relate to that is we talked when I was introducing the idea of how Oregon isn't really like known for volleyball necessarily, but is introducing men's volleyball in 26. So that's coming
Yep.
down the pipe, is like it's really starting to expand. I know earlier what I mentioned, thinking about the transition and how it would be rocky a little bit, was the baptismal introduction, okay, for fans around this country and around the world to really see college volleyball at the upper echelon of TV viewership. Here's why I said it that way, is you too were baptized and
That
introduced introduced to the love of Jesus in May of 2024. And what I need to know basis here is what were some of the things that you were thinking about when making that decision to take that faith step, and how did you get to that point to give your life to Christ?
Man, that is such a loaded question because there are so many things that I can say, but I will address it, and then maybe you can kind of prompt me with some other questions if you want to, if there's something that you want to know more about.
Most definitely.
But basically, in start of 2023 was when, so actually I'll go back to my to me at Michigan State. I was not, and so this version, I was telling you about this, Brian, before we started, but this is not me at all.
Sure.
I didn't have a faith to proclaim. I didn't have a God that I could confidently say is the one true God. I didn't know Jesus was a person. Like, there's so many things about me that were not the same then and are different now, but it's been because of the mercy and the grace of the Lord that I've been able to come to know him in a personal way. And I
Mm,
honestly think what changed for me was I heard for the first time that the God, the creator of everything, wants to have a personal relationship with you. And I had never heard that before. And that was stemmed from a lot of, different circumstances, whether that was, going to church, being invited to church again for the first time since I was
sure.
basically a kid. And then there was the different people that the Lord had placed in my life that I could just ask these burning questions that I had about the faith, like the qualms essentially that I had with Christianity. I had these spaces to be able to just be that, to be the
Mm,
person who had questions, who had doubts, who wasn't sure. And from all of that, it just, the Lord was doing a working in my heart. And that all led up to the moment that I knew I wanted to be baptized. I knew I wanted to declare my faith publicly. I knew that I wanted to just be washed away of all of the past sins of my life, the things that, the shame and the guilt that I was identifying with or struggling with. And so that is essentially what led up to my baptism. And then also at the same time, my husband Elijah, who we'll probably talk about him a little bit later, which I would love to talk about him. He had two teammates that he had kind of been walking in discipleship with, and they had been saved essentially a little bit before me, or actually a little bit, pretty much at the same time as me. And so they were also able to, that day that I got baptized, it was the three of us, me and then two of Elijah's teammates who are now our really good friends. And I'm friends with one of their wives, and she's amazing. And so it just was kind of like this, the whole culmination of the Lord continuously meeting me where I was, and then putting the right people in my life, putting the exact people I need in my life, that led up to that moment of me being able to declare my faith publicly and to be baptized at a beautiful beach down the road here. That I will never forget that day. It was the best day of my life. Oh, okay. I have to also share this little story because I think it is perfectly encompasses just how good the Lord is. And leading up to that moment, so that day it was a really kind of cloudy day, and for Hawaii, it's like, rain and stuff is normal. But I was like, oh man, I kind of wanted it to be clear on the day of my baptism, just be able to enjoy the sun after I get in the water and then come out. And so it was cloudy, and then we got dunked, and then we came up, and it was awesome. And then it started to rain a bit. And as it's starting to rain, we're like, okay, well, we'll just like take a picture. We had everybody line up, all of our church family, the three of us who got baptized. And then the lady who was taking the picture, she's like, oh my God. And we all turn around. It's the most beautiful rainbow you've ever seen. Like, it was it was the most full rainbow from the horizon, like the bottom of the horizon to the other bottom of the horizon. And we were all standing there just in awe of, like, that we could have never expected that. And there was a lady on the beach who was just there with her family, and she's like, man, the Lord, we don't know her at all, she's like, the Lord is so pleased with you guys, and she's pointing at the rainbow, she's like, this is proof of that. So I'll have to send you that picture, because there's a picture of the rainbow. And I think that within itself is just so telling to the day that I got baptized and decided to publicly declare my faith. The Lord met me where I was, and he, like, I just knew, I could hear, like, he's pleased with you. And that was one of the, literally, when I tell you, the best day of my life.
mm, mm. Oh my gosh. I That just fired me up. Like,
Yeah.
let's go. At service this morning, there were three baptisms at Common Church, and there were, in the 11 o'clock, there were going to be four. And
Mm.
I just, you saying that reaffirms everything that, you know, I'm sure one of those seven who we heard about earlier today would say as well. It's just, it's remarkable to me that you can experience a couple seconds and it moves you to tears.
Oh
And
man,
it just is beyond profoundly emotional. And
absolutely.
I just thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, Here's where we gotta go because, and I want to be cognizant of your time because I know we talked about, 3 o'clock getting you out of here,
Mhm.
or before. So we'll get under the wire. Something that has been the first thing actually that you mentioned to me in terms of what you desired to talk about and speak on in a piece to your journey that it was just, one of the larger ones was discipleship. So when I mention that word, what comes to mind for you? Talk me through how the concept of discipleship worked in your journey to faith.
Yeah, so that has been really the difference between, I feel like, going from being somebody who attends church, weekly and then is able to sit and hear the word and then go about their week. I think discipleship is the difference between knowing, like, between going to church and kind of knowing of Jesus, and then discipleship is following Jesus and knowing him personally.
Mm,
And so if you think about all the disciples, that the 12 disciples that followed Jesus, if you go back to the gospels and you read about their lives, it's what they did was Jesus just went, he grabbed them, he said, let's go. And they followed him and they saw how he lived, and they were able to just be around while he was doing all of this ministry, and they just observed. They were there, and then they got to eventually grow into a role where they could do miracles on their own, and all of these things. And so I think when you're talking about discipleship, what you're really talking about is just being able to observe the life of a true follower of Christ, of somebody who
mm,
really loves Jesus. And so for me, that looked like two women from my church primarily, who I got connected with when I first started going. Our church is called Pearlside, and when I
mm,
first started going to Pearlside, I just really got in conversation with them. And after that, we just started meeting up for lunch, and they would just ask about my story and they would talk about their lives. And then all of a sudden I'm, going over to their houses to just hang out around their families. And it's really just doing life with others in community, in a way where you're constantly just learning different things in different ways that Christ lived through other people. So I think for me, that idea of discipleship is literally, it's friendship, it's doing life with others, but it's doing it in a way where you're able to just observe Christ's teachings within the lives of the people around you.
mm. Absolutely. I love the way you put that. And I think I wanted to dispel something that somebody who is newer in their faith or coming to understand might be wondering, like, oh, that's kind of weird that you just, followed around and like went to somebody's house, like what did you have any moments of that for you where you were like, oh, like what am I doing? Like what is going to come of this? Was there any uncertainty from beginning to watch and observe, as you said?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot of moments where you're kind of like, I am unsure of, like, it's, for instance, that first time that I went to church, I think Elijah brought up to me, he was like, we should, I want to introduce you to somebody. And in my head, I'm like, I do not want to meet anybody in this place. Like, I don't, I've been around church people before. I grew up in the church on and off. Like, I
Sure.
kind of know how church people can be. And so I was like, I don't want to meet up with anybody. But then I think in the following weeks, we were after a church service, and Elijah was off talking to somebody, and I was kind of just alone by myself standing there. And that is when I met, her name's Michelle,
Mm,
and Michelle was pregnant at that time, but then she just, like, hey, like, introduced herself to me, and we sat down for a moment and we just talked, and she was like so real and so honest and about the things that she had gone through before Christ. She was like, yeah, used to smoke a lot of weed, like, used to party a lot, like, but then the Lord saved me. The Lord delivered me from those things. And I was like, I have never heard somebody in the church be so open and honest about the things that they actually struggled with. And so that was the first moment that I was like, okay, I'd be willing to sit down and have a conversation with her. And so it wasn't like she put Jesus, like pushed Jesus on me to start, but it was more of just like, hey, this is my story. What's
Mm,
yours? And then I think that that is where it all of a sudden there was a moment where it went from me meeting with this lady from church to then friendship to then discipleship. And I think that when it happens more organically in that way, it's less of like you're following somebody around like you're following Christ around, you know, it's more of just like you're friends, you're doing life together in a way, and then you're just kind of picking things up along the way.
mm. What a perfect segue. I want to give a golf clap, a little props to you for segueing into where I wanted to go. You talked about doing life with somebody, which you've been able to do with Mr. Elijah Robinson for I'm unsure of this. You can fill in my gap here. How long exactly have you been together?
So 2023. So
Yeah.
we're going on 3 years
Okay.
or 2 years. Wait, time out. 2022.
There it
No,
is.
2023. 2023. That's my final 2023. So
Right.
we're coming up on whatever year it is, 2023. So
Okay, absolutely. Absolutely. I do though want to ask is like what has he meant to your like two parts. A, how would you characterize your relationship? And then B, what has he meant to your growth and your, you know, boldness of walking out your faith now in this most recent chapter?
yes, and that is I could talk about Elijah all day. I love that. Like that is my best friend to
Mm,
first and foremost kind of characterize our relationship. Like that is really my ride or die, my person. And to take us back a little bit to 2023 to February 2023. So a funny part about the University of Hawaii is um our facilities are not the greatest. That is just a complete honest truth. When I came from Michigan State, you know, I've the facilities there are awesome. And then I came here and I was like, wow, this is definitely different. But they
mm,
were redoing the main weight room here when I in the year of 2023. And so what actually happened was they moved all of the weights to like an old gym. And so the volleyball team and the football team, we would actually lift at the same time. Like they would be on kind of the main racks and we would be on the side racks. And that is how eventually I came to know Elijah, is because we were just in the same vicinity all the time. And then the first day that we end up hanging out, is that he just came over and we literally just talked, and we talked for hours. And what he did was he shared his testimony with me essentially. And for some people who may not know exactly what a testimony is, it basically is just what how the Lord met him where he was, saved him, and brought him out of it. And
mm,
it was the most raw, unfiltered version of somebody's story that I think I had ever heard. So much to the point where I was in tears over this man that I essentially had just met. And so there was a part of me that he was talking about this God. He was talking about his faith so boldly. And at that time he was really on fire for Christ. And it made me like kind of question some of the things that I had believed about this God that he was talking about. Because
mm,
at that point I was not a believer. I was a person who was kind of lost in, like, I believed that there was something like a higher power, something out there, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And that was kind of the same theme for me. All while I was at Michigan State, I would go to AIA a little bit. Like Becca Fuljan would invite me, or Naya would invite me to AIA. I would attend every so often, and I would understand like this God that they were talking about, but I didn't really pursue it at all. And so it
mm,
wasn't, fast forward to this moment with me and Elijah, that it was this man who then shared this with me. I was interested in what he was talking about, but then he was actively living it out. He was practicing what he preached, in just the way that he cared for me and the way that he listened to me, his integrity, just his character is what really spoke volumes to me. And that is the reason that I could say I started looking into the Bible. I started asking him a lot of questions, and I started going to church with him. I started just being more inquisitive and more open to maybe what this God had, and this relationship I could have with him. And then I find myself in places like getting baptized and being around more people of Christ. And now I'm here and I can talk about my faith so boldly, but it was such a process. And I could honestly say, obviously, it started with God, and God knew what he was doing with me. But it really started with my relationship with Elijah, and just his courage and his boldness to share his testimony with me on that first day.
Mhm. And I think now you've filled in a lot of the blanks that I had of like, I see what you're doing, but I don't really understand the heart. But
Mhm.
it all begins to make sense. And I say that from the perspective of one of the ways that I knew I was like, I need to talk to you is when I started to see everything that you were doing with Sacred Sports Souls. So I need to ask, and I heard about it when we were off camera, but for
Mhm.
everyone out there, is like you now begun to move into the realm of sharing your testimony as well as your faith with other athletes and friends and folks out there. What was that like for you to move into that, and what were some of the things that came of having that platform?
Yeah, honestly, at the beginning, it was a little scary. It was a little bit like, is this something that I really want to do? Like, do I want to be known as the Jesus girl that is like always posting about Jesus and like all this?
Mm,
And I had to really sit down and reflect on some of these like just ideas that I had in my head about Christians and what it meant to be a Christian and how people portrayed and perceived Christians.
sure.
And so that really was a wrestle for a little bit. And then I got over that and I was like, you know what? I have been given this platform as a student athlete. Like as I had the wonderful opportunity of being at Michigan State first and now in Hawaii, and these two communities that I care so much about. It's like, the people who are going to accept me for me are going to accept me for me, and I'm going to be able to do more good talking about my faith publicly than I would if I was just, because social media especially started to feel just monotonous and kind of, well, pointless, essentially meaningless.
Mm,
And so I was like, there has to be a purpose for this. And the Lord was like, I have a purpose for you, and it's to be more bold and outward about your faith. And so since then, honestly, by worldly standards, I've probably lost more followers, but also gained more followers, if that makes sense. Like in terms of if you're talking about like Instagram and TikTok and like all of these different things. But at the same time, one of the most rewarding things I think that has happened since I've been more outward about my faith, since I've started a podcast. There was actually a guy, Elijah works as a bouncer at Dave and Buster's out here sometimes, and there's a guy that came up to him, and he's like, "Hey, I know you. I watched your podcast with you and your girlfriend, and it was awesome." And it was a random guy that came up to Elijah. And from that moment, like I think I was realizing, no, this is something greater than, even if one person has watched it, two people have watched it, but they got to take something from it. I'm like, this is absolutely worth anything that I might lose in the world to, gain like now this eternal life in Christ and also be able to share that with others. And so it was scary at first, but then as I started to see like fruits of it, it was like, no, this is absolutely the right decision. The Lord is honoring what I'm doing and he sees what I'm doing. And so, yeah, I'm not really on social media as much anymore. So that's why I'm so happy I actually got on and was able to see your message, because then I get opportunities like this just to go on other people's platforms and still do the same thing that I enjoy doing, which is talking about the love of Christ.
most certainly. Most certainly. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And I'm so glad we have been able to do it. What do you think about exiting this one here with a little rapid fire segment before we get out?
Let's do it.
Cool. So, without further ado, I'm still waiting to find a freaking sponsor. So, if anybody wants it, tap in. I mean, we're looking for
Have
it.
is, yes.
But we got Rolling Loud on the Rec Room, and I've been able to do it just so you know for reference. I've been able to do it with Cami Minor, setter at Stanford. I've been able to do it with Jalen Swain, was at Michigan State, now at University Pacific, and I was able to do it with Logan Case, who was setter at Western Michigan as well.
Mhm.
That being said, so it's crazy because it's 4 for 4 now volleyball,
Yeah.
athletes, which is like, come on, what are we doing here? But what is one thing that might surprise folks out there about the state of Hawaii being where you are right now?
That there is civilization here. I know I kind of make a joke earlier about, like going to the main, but no, it's a Oahu, which is the island that I'm on, is a big city. Essentially like big city in terms of in comparison to the other islands, which are a little bit more rural. And so the second part to my answer to that is that there are multiple islands. So when people are say they're coming to Hawaii, they could be going to different islands. They could be going to Maui. I'm on Oahu, Hawaii, the Big Island, which is the main kind of Hawaii island. So Hawaii is made up of multiple islands, but there's also we have things. There's McDonald's. There's we have other big stores and things too. So it's not too different from the mainland. There's just a beach down the street and some other local obviously places as well. But yeah, it's not super different, but
No.
there are some things that I think mainland people could be a little bit ignorant about, which is okay. It's okay.
The we have McDonald's got me. The golden arches are still there.
They're here. They have things like spam and eggs and rice though. Like there's
Sure.
different items at these McDonald's, but and then people here love rice and eggs and spam. That's like a spam is a huge thing.
Mm, mm. What, Talia, is a next faith step that you've been thinking about taking?
Hmm. I think so. Now being married with to Elijah, he has a calling on his life, and I definitely think that ministry, being in ministry, like vocational ministry, is something that the Lord has called him to eventually. Like right now, he's still pursuing football,
Mm,
but I think for us, I think that that is definitely a next step that will happen. We don't know exactly when, but for him to step into at least part-time vocational ministry. So I would say that his steps are my steps. So at the same, so that's kind of my answer to your question is I think, we'll try to be more integrated into the church and doing ministry in that way.
most definitely. And then the last one I got, actually two more. 2025 will be a more complete year if you blank.
Ooh, so my first answer is if I can grow closer to the Lord. That's always going to be like my God first. But then I guess, following that as like a sub point, hmm, I think right now I'm in a season where there's kind of a lot of uncertainties. Like I don't really know exactly what I'm going to do after May. Elijah and I are still having a wedding in June, so
Sure.
like we got married, we eloped, but we're still having a wedding in June, and so I think I will just be most fulfilled when I know I'm settled somewhere
Mm,
in around August time. Like, because I think right now that I have no idea where I'm going to be in August. Like, yeah, you couldn't ask me right now. I actually have no clue. My answer is wherever God wants me to be. So I think by the end of this year, I will be most fulfilled when I know where I'm going to be settled for the next few years at least.
most definitely. I empathize with that. We talked about the
Yeah.
job market and getting ready to go.
Yeah.
No idea. No idea. Uh, Lastly, is there anybody that you want to shout out that you want to give thanks to? Is there anything that's on your mind, on your heart before we depart here?
Yeah. Shout out to Jesus. Shout out to my husband. Is like I wouldn't be able to talk about any of this without him, growing any of this without him. Um, and then this is just a really general one. And this can kind of cover a lot of bases, but shout out to anybody who might be watching this that is unsure about where they are in their faith. Maybe they're questioning their faith. Maybe they are like, have never heard of this Jesus thing before. And this is the first time. Maybe you're on this because you knew me at Michigan State and you're like, I need to know how she ended up like
Mm,
this. Shout out to all of the people who have questions. So I think that that was me and that still is me. If you have questions, my only encouragement to you is that there is the Lord wants to meet you where you are right now. And so there's no question too big. There's no sin too big. There's nothing too big for God. And so I just encourage you, whatever that inkling is on your heart, just pursue it.
mm. Well said. Well said. And if you can believe this, we got out of here just under the 3 o'clock time frame. I love
Oh, and
that.
also shout out to you, Brian. I appreciate you for real. I appreciate you for having me on. I appreciate you for what you're doing. Like 50 plus episodes is so awesome. Like I know how much time and effort you put into this. And so if you don't get enough props, I know that the Lord is honoring what you are doing and he sees what you're doing. And so thank you. Please keep doing it.
Absolutely. 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 And I'm excited to, continue to stay in touch and keep watching the journey unfold. It's going to be sweet. And I want to reciprocate that. Thank you for coming on. And for all of y'all out there, I hope that y'all can take away ample things because I know I sure can. And it's just phenomenal to know that in every corner of the world, in every nation, of every tribe, of every tongue, that there are folks who are being committed to serving Him. And Talia, thank you. And wherever y'all may be, we hope that you have a good morning, afternoon,
Mhm.
or night. Let's go. Sweet.